Let's get on to the news. Let's talk about that. The Home Secretary is under pressure to intervene as the police officer who shot this guy, Chris Kaba, faces the sack despite being cleared by a jury.
Well, the lifting of reporting restrictions means it can now be revealed that Chris Kaba was a key figure in one of London's most dangerous gangs called the 6-7. He was accused of being involved in 2 shootings just days before the police officer, Martin Blake, shot him dead in September 2022.
Well, the Commissioner of the Metropolitan Police, Sir Mark Rowley, has admitted the system is broken. Reform is needed.
No police officer is above the law, but we have been clear that the system holding police to account is broken. The more we crush the spirit of good officers, the less they can fight crime.
Well, joining us in the studio to talk through this and more, former advisor to Boris Johnson, we say good morning to Oscar Redrop. Hi, Oscar.
Morning, guys.
Morning.
Oscar, I look at all this and I'm glad this information has been released. I don't know why it wasn't released before now. But, you know, this guy's family go about treating him like some sort of saint and whatever. And we see a whole different side to Kaba here. But my point is, why would I want to be a firearms officer? Because it's just a no-win situation. Because when you do defend people, when you do use your firearms, you are the one who is branded a criminal. You are the one who is in big trouble.
Yeah, it's a huge responsibility. And it's fun. It's very, very interesting because in the last, I think, 24 hours or so, former colleagues or, former firearm officers have come out and said that this will create real shockwaves, this experience and this trial and this incident, because there is so much responsibility involved. And to use their phrase, not mine, but at that point of contact, split decision contact, you want police officers to feel that they can absolutely make the decision that will ensure not only their own the safety of their own officers and their peers and colleagues, but crucially the general public.
Yeah.
And if there's always
look at the video footage that was released yesterday about this guy Kaba going into that nightclub, drawing a pistol and shooting this guy and then pursuing him across the street and whatever.
I know, and I completely get your frustration about why this hasn't come out now. That was absolutely, I think, for legal reasons. But it's interesting because I've been watching some stuff on this. I even asked a few kind of friends of mine who are journalists, and the kind of crime journalists, like really in the know, knew this stuff about Chris for a very long time. And not only is he part of this, very, very violent gang, but he was deemed, in inverted commas, that one of the main hitmen within that gang.
Oscar, not the way it was portrayed in the papers and not the way it's portrayed. His family's given a lot of airtime to show how this gross injustice was carried out and how awful this is and whatever. And the photographs used in all the newspapers of this smiling, lovely, really friendly-looking guy, and he was anything but.
Well, it's often the way. It's often the way, and these things do become PR campaigns, on each side that kind of get out of control, and we lose the focus of the real issue. The one thing I would say, just a tiny, tiny bit of nuance, is that bad people, when they die, they still leave people behind who love them, who maybe didn't see that side of them, and so I do get a little bit wary of attacking those around him who obviously cared for him. But in terms of Blake,
I don't. Because they get the publicity, they get the sympathy, they get everybody thinking, oh yeah, it was awful, this was terrible.
Well,
actually, most people don't care less what would happen to someone like Kaba.
Well, that needs to transfer now and I think Chris Philp said it. I think Rob Jenrick has said it. The fact that this guy could get done for gross misconduct now. I think Martin Blake has probably had a scarring experience.
Yeah.
And I think it should be wrapped up as quickly as possible. And
it's going to be wrapped up that this guy will be retired from the force. What point does that serve? I mean, we've never been in more dangerous times where we need armed officers who will pull that trigger because other people are pulling the triggers elsewhere around the world. And you come up to Christmas and we've seen in the past all these attacks on Christmas festivals
Yeah.
and Christmas markets around Europe. And you think, well, who would become a firearms officer? That's the debate. We want to know what you think on this today. You have your say. A lot of you will be reading headlines today about this guy, Chris Kaba, who was shot by an armed police officer. And Norman, big coverage on this today because we're actually getting the true side of the story and not this loving picture of Kaba, which was over all the newspapers yesterday and giving a complete false impression, I think, of who he was, what he stood for, and how he died and why he died.
Well, of course, the police in general would have been aware of his background and aware of what he was in a way that perhaps the general public wasn't, because they weren't told. And they would have been made an assessment as to whether or not he represented a risk, not just to the public, but to the police who were engaging with him. I mean, I find this quite extraordinary for two reasons. One is that the police officer, having been found not guilty, is now facing potential expulsion from the police. I mean, that seems to me to be... He's had a trial and he's been found not guilty. That's the end of it. He should get back to work. And otherwise, it's double jeopardy. He's been tried twice effectively for that particular action. But secondly, I don't agree with the Metropolitan Police Commissioner, Mark Rowley, who seems to want to have exemptions, sweeping exemptions, according to the Times, for prosecution for officers involved in shootings. Now, you assess each individual action according to whether or not it breaks the law. And if there's a case for it, then the Crown Prosecution Service will assess whether or not a prosecution is merited. And if it is merited, it takes place. It's as simple as that. There's an issue as to whether or not the name of people who are subject to investigation should be made public. And I think that it should only happen when they've been charged formally and not beforehand. But I mean, if an officer in theory behaves in a reprehensible way, then of course it should be subject to trial. We don't want to go down the American road where you get police officers shooting people in the back and are exempt from any prosecution.
Yeah. I think it's really, I completely agree with you, Norman. I think it's really, really important that our police are held to account because I think we have to trust them. And I think, I mean, I know that, you know, a lot of people felt he should never have been put through this, but actually, you know, whatever Chris Kaba was and however awful he was in a car and he was unarmed and he was killed. And
don't agree with you. He was using that car as a fatal weapon, driving it into people.
And there needed to be an investigation.
Well, because of your opinion there and your sort of attitude, I would say, why would I want to be an armed police officer? You get all the risk, none of the praise, none of the glory for it, nothing, and yet you're there saving people's lives. Why are we worried about Kaba? Why are we worried?
No, I'm not talking about a personal thing. I think it's very important that the police can be held to account because I think we trust them more, right? And I think that's what's important. It's important that we have a police force. As the police say over and over again, we rule by consent, right? That's how they do it. And actually, it's really, really important that we trust them and that we know that if they're going to do something wrong, that they're going to be held account and they're not above the law. I just think that's fantastic. And I'm really proud to live in a country where police are not above the law.
I totally agree with that. And the number of police shootings, actually, in this country is minuscule compared to what happens in America. Yeah. And people over there, police officers over there, just seem to be waving guns around and shooting people willy-nilly. I know someone who was stopped for a speeding offence, a British citizen on an American highway, and told put his hands on the wheel. If he took his hands off the wheel, he'd be shot. Yeah, that's what the officer said to him.
I suppose the problem is, Norman, it's that everybody there has the right to carry a gun.
Well, it's mad, actually. I mean, you know, the American system is completely bonkers. I don't actually think it's what the original founding fathers meant by the Constitution. This idea that everybody should be tooled up with semi-automatic machine guns, which is what they've got over there.